Since 2020, suppliers that represent 90% of Decathlon's purchasing volume have been measuring their CO2 emissions by monitoring their energy consumption. In 2021, it is still a priority for Decathlon to continue to ensure reliable measurements for its production CO2 footprint. As a second step, Decathlon aims to engage its suppliers to define targets of CO2 reduction based on these measurements. The best way to do this is to use the science-based targets methodology, as Decathlon did. But what are science-based targets? Science-based targets provide a clearly defined pathway for companies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, helping prevent the worst impacts of climate change and future-proof our business growth. Targets are considered science-based if they are in line with the latest climate science deemed necessary to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. In 2019, Decathlon committed to science-based targets for reducing by 75% its absolute Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions by 2026, compared to the base year of 2016. For Scope 3, Decathlon also committed that suppliers responsible for 90% of its purchase volume will set their own science-based targets by 2024. A company's Scope 1 emissions are its direct greenhouse gas emissions, emissions from sources that are owned or controlled by the reporting entity. We can take as an example a boiler that produces energy on-site with coal or gas. Scope 2 emissions are the indirect greenhouse gas emissions from the consumption of purchased electricity, heat, or steam. The most common example is the electricity that we procure from the national grid. The Scope 3 covers other indirect emissions, such as the extraction and production of purchased materials and fuels. Our suppliers' activities are therefore part of Decathlon's Scope 3 emissions. So, how do we define a science-based target? There are two options for the supplier to define a science-based target. Firstly, you can present your target to the Science-Based Targets Initiative for an official validation. It will allow you to communicate publicly the target once it is validated, and SBTi will publish it on its Companies Taking Action website. The other option is to apply to Decathlon's internal SBT tool for your Scope 1 and 2, in line with the 1.5 degree trajectory, and sign a commitment letter. It is not an official commitment to SBTi, but it will ensure that your target of reduction is aligned with Decathlon's commitment. We have now clarified the starting point, the measurement, and the final objective, which is the target. It is now important to define the actions to achieve this objective. Building a trajectory will help to pilot the impact of the actions adapted to the local context and to ensure we reach the target. There are already several examples of our suppliers, by size, by country, by process, that are committed to reducing their CO2 footprint. It's all about taking this first step, measuring and setting your target with SBT and pilot actions. An SBT commitment can benefit organisations by being more prepared for future legislation and by meeting stakeholders' expectations. You can see here some examples at our suppliers. Together, to reduce our environmental footprint. Together, for a sustainable industry.